testimony, we also have to be aware about ways in which we can improve the accuracy and reliability of eyewitness testimony, and that is the use of the cognitive interview. So if you ever get a question that's asking you to outline ways in which you can improve eyewitness testimony, it is going to be asking you in particular about the cognitive interview technique. So the cognitive interview was developed by Fisher and Geiselman, and it was based on a lot of research into memory. So for example, failure to retrieve due to an absence of cues and context state dependent forgetting, and whether our memory is down to lack of availability or lack of accessibility. Also, Loftus and Palmer's research into leading questions, research into anxiety, and research into post-event discussion. So based on all that research, they developed an interview technique that was based on 4 main principles or techniques that they believe enhance the recall and the accuracy of that recall. So it's a technique that they try to use and enable police forces to gain more information and accurate information from people that have witnessed a crime. So to help you remember those 4 techniques, try and use the acronym of COPE. So C is context, reinstate context. So the person is asked to mentally return to the event or the situation that they were in when they witnessed a crime, and it is hoped that that will act as a trigger. So they're asked to take themselves back to the time of day, what the weather was like, what they could smell, how they felt, what was going on around them, and it's helped that they will act as hooks and cues to access the information. O stands for change order. So they're asked to recall the events or situation in a different order. So tell us what happened from the beginning. Or they might be asked to recall the events in reverse order. So working backwards, tell us the events of that day. P is for perspective. So they might be asked to change the perspective in which they are recounting the situation from. So they are asked to recall it from another person's point of view. So how would it have looked from the perpetrator's point of view? How would the situation have looked from the witness on the other side of the room? E stands for everything. So they are asked to report everything that happened during that event, even if it seems irrelevant or not important. So tell us everything that happened. So you might get some questions like this that are asking you simply your AO1, so they're asking you to recall the information to assess your understanding and knowledge. So identify and outline 2 techniques that may be used in the cognitive interview. Now you're going to get 2 marks for simply identifying 2 techniques from the cognitive interview. So that could be reinstate context, could be change perspective, could be change order, or could be report everything. You then have to give me a brief summary of what that technique is. So you're going to get a mark for the technique and a mark for explaining it. And then same for your second point. Similarly, you could get an AO2 question that is linked to understanding the knowledge. So Jenny was standing at a bus stop talking on her mobile phone. The weather was wet and cold. 2 men in the bus queue started arguing. One of the men was stabbed and badly injured. Later that day, the police questioned Jenny using a cognitive interview. They asked her to report everything she could remember about the incident, even if it seemed unimportant. Apart from report everything, explain how the police could use the cognitive interview to investigate what Jenny could remember. In your answer, you must refer to details in the passage above. So now it's important to read the full question. So it says, apart from report everything, so we can't use that technique. So we've got 3 techniques that we can. We now need to explain how the police can use those techniques, and we need to refer to the information above. Now there's going to be a breadth and depth trade-off. So you can either go into detail about the 3 remaining techniques, or you can go into more detail about 1 technique. It depends how many you're doing and the level of detail you'd have to go into. So if we were to say we would try to reinstate context, the police might ask Jenny to take herself back to remember what the weather was like, what she was doing at the time of the event, who she was talking to on the phone, what she could see, what she could feel, what she was wearing, to act as a cue. If we're asking to change perspective, we could talk about how would the event look from the man who was the victim. What would he have seen if he was to report what happened? Or it could be explain what would have the event looked like from the man that was a perpetrator. Similarly, if she was asked to change order, it could be starting from when the man was stabbed, work backwards and tell us what happened. So moving on to our AO 3-hour evaluation of it. So we do have supporting evidence, so Fisher et al. So generally witnesses report greater detail in comparison to when a standard interview is used. So this shows the benefits, the accuracy. This are clearly a strength. If they're reporting more accurate detail and greater detail, then that's a positive of the cognitive interview. We've got some contradictory evidence though, so it's found that witnesses actually recall more incorrect information as well as correct information in comparison to the cognitive standard interview. So obviously this adds to the police force's time and effort and having to try and sift out the correct information from the incorrect information. Usefulness. The technique is a lot more structured than the standard interview technique, so therefore a lot more information is gained and a lot more detailed information is gained, which is very useful for the justice system and trying to put together a testimony to charge a person for a crime. However, we can have a counterpoint in that it is very time consuming and requires a lot of training and therefore money, which means that police forces are generally quite reluctant to use it. So actually, yes, it might be a good technique, but is there ways in which this could be studied further to make it more efficient and more readily used by police forces? And T. So we've got testable. Now actually the research tends to be quite unreliable because of the different components of the cognitive interview. Police forces tend to use different versions of it or different techniques from it. So therefore it's hard to actually do comparative research into how effective the cognitive interview is at improving eyewitness testimony. So you might get some evaluation questions. Now they can be multiple choice, they're not always extended answers. So below are 5 evaluative statements about the cognitive interview. Which 2 statements are correct? And then you have to select the 2. Now, if I was presented with multiple choice, I'd simply cross out the ones that I know are not correct straight away and then whittle it down from that. So cognitive interview can only be used in Western cultures. That's not relevant, so I'd cross that one out. Takes longer than the standard interview. Yes, it does, so I'll probably think that that's an option. Involves unethical treatment of witnesses. Incorrect, there's nothing to do with any ethical issues. Requires special training by police forces. Yes, it does, hence why they're reluctant to use it. Cannot be used to interview children. Incorrect, it's suitable for anyone of any ages. So therefore I know that it's B and D. Equally, you've got your extended essay questions that could be used. So describe and evaluate at least one way of improving eyewitness recall. Refer to evidence in your answer. So improving eyewitness testimony, cognitive interview. I know I've got to talk about that. So my AO1, I talk about how it's developed by Fisher and Geiselman based on research into memory. I talk about it having 4 different techniques. I describe each of those 4 techniques in a bit of detail, giving an example of a question that might be used to try and demonstrate to the examiner that I actually do know my stuff. I haven't just simply learnt some information. I can apply it. I can demonstrate that I have sound knowledge and understanding. You could mention about the enhanced cognitive interview technique if you wanted to extend yourself a bit further. Then I would move on to 3 to 4 evaluation points about the cognitive interview technique, trying to be synoptic and use keywords throughout. I would also try to maybe mention that obviously, yes, it gains greater detail of information and how that improves the economy. So showing the researcher and examiners that I can be synoptic in my points.